Welcome to a special late-night edition of Forecast Lab. Had some schedule conflicts, so we're not getting the show out until right now. But better late than never. Anyway, the summer solstice coming up in less than a week, Thursday, June 20th. And that's when we have the longest days in the Northern Hemisphere. Yeah, lots of video on social media of flooding in southern Florida. Since Tuesday, there's been 13 to 20 inches of rainfall across parts of the state. Here's a summary of estimated precipitation from the National Water Prediction Service. This is from radar data, and we see right here in the Everglades about 20 inches of rain. North Miami about 20 inches as well, and this large purple region is 10 to 15 inches, and this is a 3-day total going back to June 11th. Here's the recap going back to June 11th. We see wave after wave of convective systems moving across the southern part of the state. There's another one on the 12th. A little bit of a break through yesterday, and another big wave comes right through. We move into today, and this is how it looks. Couple of weaker waves moving into the central part of the state, but Miami looking pretty good this afternoon. Let's take a look at that surface analysis for tonight. We've got cold air flowing into the Pacific Northwest, temperatures in the 50s and 60s in the interior regions. We do see the warm air close at hand in the Salt Lake City area, Wendover, temperatures there in the mid-80s, even at the Sour. Another warm sector located right there over Wyoming into the Black Hills region with a warm front just to the east, and that's co-located with those showers and storms that we're going to check out shortly. In fact, why don't we do that now? At the current time, we have a MCS, a mesoscale convective system, working its way into the Corn Belt. This originated from the Sangre de Cristos and the Raton Mesa. This evening, it moved across the plains of eastern Colorado into western Kansas. Most of the energy heading up to the northeast. The Dodge City radar does show that it tapers off down to the south. Interstate 70, Hayes, and Russell, that's going to be about the southern limit. And then as we go further south, all that we find is a little wind shift, an outflow boundary, dividing the southerly flow, the moisture, the warmth, from the southwesterly and westerly flow back behind this weather system. Going into the panhandles, we do pick up a little bit more activity. This is definitely outflow dominant. In fact, you can see the outflow running away through the Wellington, Shamrock, and Canadian area. So this is all going to be elevated activity. Don't see any deep convective elements until you get down towards around Clovis. In the northeastern U.S., we've had frontal passage with showers and thunderstorms moving through Boston, New York City, and Philadelphia. Those have pushed on off out into the Atlantic Ocean, and in the wake, cooler air, 50s and 60s, flowing down from Quebec and Ontario. That's driven by this 1021 millibar high near North Bay, Ontario. The southeastern U.S. looking fairly quiet. That atmospheric river that produced all that flooding in Florida, that's moved on off to the east as well. Let's take a look at the integrated vapor transport. And there you go. That's the integrated vapor transport map for early this afternoon, showing that atmospheric river coming out of the Caribbean, moving across the Bahamas and well offshore from the Carolinas. IVT values about 500 to 1,000 offshore, and on the tail end in the range of 300 to 500. What's going to change over the weekend? Let's just take a quick look at the forecast. Another surge coming north, but it actually starts bending more towards the west as the western Gulf becomes active. We're going to be seeing this large fetch coming in from the Caribbean, developing on Sunday and pushing into the western Gulf for Monday and Tuesday. We're expecting cyclogenesis in the Bay of Campeche, the GFS and European model both indicating some possible tropical development down in that area. Meanwhile, where we have the coupling with the pressure falls and the ridging in between, That's going to be a sort of gate that allows very strong flow from southeast to northwest, and that'll pump more moisture into the western Gulf Coast area for midweek, flowing mostly into Texas and the Rio Grande. So let's take a look at this moisture. It is voluminous down there in Florida, over 2 inches of precipitable water, and also quite a bit in the Central Plains, 1.5 to 1.9 inches. That's just ahead of that MCS right in that region right there, feeding off of that moisture supply. All right, so let's go ahead and go into the remainder of the weekend. You can see there's a little bit of dry air across Texas and Arkansas. That's made things a little bit more pleasant in our neck of the woods. Then going into Saturday, well, that slug of moisture continues to push to the east. That's going to produce another round of thunderstorms for tomorrow, and we do have a slight risk for basically this area right here. There's going to be a chance of severe weather and maybe a low-end possibility of tornadoes. We'll just go very quickly into Sunday and Monday. This is when that Gulf surge really starts up. 2-inch precipitable water into Louisiana, into Gulfport, Mississippi. Then we go into later Monday and into Tuesday. That moisture gets even more impressive. This is all 2 inches and above. We don't usually see 2 inches until we get into late summer, so this is quite a surge of moisture. And the GFS at this range, 96 hours, this is from the 06Z run, using slightly older data here. But yeah, the GFS has not really done a great job with what's happening in the Gulf, so the details are just kind of vague at this point, but we do know that somewhere in the Gulf Coast region we're going to be dealing with quite a bit of moisture. Anyway, I wanted to circle back to our surface map. Not much going on in the Gulf right now, just kind of an east-northeasterly flow. This is somewhat recirculated maritime tropical air. You can see the dew points are a little bit on the low side, upper 60s and lower 70s. As we go further to the west, a dry line in New Mexico. This is definitely a June type pattern. Starting to see a little bit of that monsoon starting there in New Mexico, but dew points in Arizona quite dry, 20s. There has been quite a bit of record heat in that part of the country. Yesterday, Roswell, New Mexico, they were up to 107. Dalhart, Texas, 105. Clayton, 101. Albuquerque, 101. Those were all daily records. Also, we had some records set in Arizona. Well, that's Fort Huachuca. But down to the southeast, right in here, Douglas, they reached 105 degrees. And that set a record for the date. And Safford, Arizona, 111 degrees with a strong, gusty west wind. Let's head out further to the west. We see that polar air flowing into the Pacific Northwest. This is the center of that cold air mass. Temperatures in the 50s this evening around Puget Sound, down into Portland as well, with 61 degrees there, and that cold air infiltrating the high deserts of Oregon, Idaho, and northern Nevada. As we go further north into Alaska, very strange. We go from 50s in Washington to 70s in the Alaskan interior. And the midnight sun is definitely out right now. The Arctic Circle located right here, everywhere from that line up to the north, they are getting midnight sun 24 hours a day. So yeah, some of this is driven by solar heating, but up to the north, high pressure across the Beaufort Sea, driving cool air into Barrow and Deadhorse. Continued cold in the Canadian Arctic, but there's another chunk of Arctic air. I think temperatures have been significantly below normal in Nunavut and the Northwest Territories. Some of it has been making its way south. Temperatures quite cool in the Canadian prairies, looking at 50s this evening. We do have some warmth out there in the Maritimes, Labrador, Newfoundland, temperatures in the upper 50s and 60s, and this is at night. 66 degrees there, right there on the coast. That's somewhere east of Goose Bay. I would imagine that's probably very uncomfortable for those people. You have to keep in mind those houses are heavily insulated, So what warmth is indoors is going to stay indoors, and 66 degrees outside, there's really not any place for that heat to go. So probably a very uncomfortable night for the Labrador coast. Let's take a quick look at that low-level jet. This is where we're at right now. The MCS located right there in Nebraska and Kansas. 30-knot flow out of the south ahead of that MCS. That's a rather meager low-level jet. That will shift eastward during the day tomorrow. So by peak heating, this is how it looks. The slight risk area right there. The low-level jet located from about Kansas City up to Minneapolis, 30 to 40 knots. Typically during a big severe weather event, that'll be up near 50 or 60 knots. So this is definitely a weak to moderate low-level jet. And we go through the overnight hours, it does pick up a little bit, up to 40 to 50 knots. So there will be some support for any MCS that gets going, maybe tracking into Wisconsin overnight. Then as we get into Sunday, we find that low-level jet out there in the Great Lakes and very little support for severe weather. We go up to 500 millibars, the mid-troposphere, and there's definitely some interesting stuff taking place here. Starting out this evening, we've got that large ridge across the central U.S., so that's helping to dampen that MCS somewhat. You can see the -10 isotherm right there forming a thermal ridge, and your severe weather events don't really like that thermal ridge. It can help with capping, but at nighttime, that's somewhat of a hindrance. You can see the cooler air out there over the west coast down to -25, -30 near that cold core low west of Washington. And as we go forward through the weekend, you can see things shifting eastward. That big ridge moves into the Great Lakes area, troughing on the west coast. So this is going to be your area of cooler weather. And we find heat out here in the Great Lakes. So yeah, it's going to be warming up big time. And look at this ridge right here across the Carolinas. You're going to see that build as we go into Tuesday. There we have a 594 decameter height contour, which is very significant for the northeastern U.S. This is a more detailed look at the 500 millibar chart, starting out right now. And there's that little troughing supporting that MCS. Let's go forward into Sunday and Monday. And we see that polar front jet really picking up in the northwestern U.S., especially in Montana. The ridge, there it is, building out there on the east coast. The 594 decameter contour right there on Monday. And we also see the 597 decameter contour on Wednesday. So that is very close to the all-time height records for that part of the country. Those run about 598 to 599. If you look at some of the climatology, there are numbers that go above 600, but those are probably instrumentation errors. 598, 599, those are going to be the all-time records for that part of the country. And what does that mean? Usually when we have those very high heights, those indicate very warm conditions in the lower and mid-troposphere. So what does that spell? Heat wave. Here's a rundown of how it all progresses. This is going to be the high temperature for Saturday. As you can see, quite cool, 60s and 70s. But yeah, there is going to be a big change. Sunday, a little bit of warm up, starting to see those 70s and a few 80s, even 90 degrees around Wheeling and Pittsburgh. Much warmer for Monday. We start to see 90s in Michigan, up to 97 at Detroit. We're seeing 95 at Indianapolis and 96 at Columbus. How much worse can it get? Well, take a look at Tuesday. Now we've got 100s around Pittsburgh. Also got 100, I think those are the Finger Lakes. I'm not too familiar with that. That's near Rochester. And 99 degrees at Albany. So yeah, this is significant heat. Wednesday is when the 500 millibar heights top out. I can see New York City right there at 91, 94 at Philadelphia, and a large area of 100s around Pittsburgh. Also seeing hundreds in New Hampshire and upper 90s through a huge swath of the Northeast all the way up into Maine. So this is bad news for that part of the country. A lot of people up there don't have good air conditioning, so they're going to have issues with this heat next week. Hundreds continue for Thursday across Massachusetts up to New Hampshire. And finally, by Friday, we may see a little bit of relief, although 90s hanging on from Boston all the way back into Illinois. So it is time to take a look at that forecast. We're going to look at the weather for Saturday, so let's bring the charts forward into the afternoon. We can see quite a bit of rain across Minnesota and Iowa, and along this warm front as we get the convective heating. We're going to be seeing thunderstorms going up around Omaha and Lincoln. Slight risk with slightly elevated tornado risk. Not a big one, but I'm sure we'll see some storm chasers out there that will aggregate into an MCS that pushes across Iowa overnight and into Wisconsin and northwestern Illinois. We also may see some storms up here near this low pressure area north of, I guess it's going to be western North Dakota, and also a few storms possible down from western Kansas into the panhandles. And as we go into the evening, there they are popping up, moving into the Woodward area, possibly to Medicine Lodge and down towards Shamrock. Temperatures will be peaking on Saturday in Tennessee, Georgia, Alabama, Nashville looking for a high of 99, upper 90s widespread through this area right here. High winds picking up in Idaho, Wyoming, looking for westerly winds, 30 to 40 miles an hour with over 50 in the higher elevations. Also strong winds across California in the higher elevations. Could be damaging gusts across the Southern California mountains, looking at maybe 60 to 70 knots for Saturday night. And then we advance into Sunday. That heat will be spreading into the plains. You can see a little bit of a downslope component right there in western Kansas and Colorado. So by afternoon, we're going to be seeing some very hot temperatures. Denver up to 95 degrees, Omaha 97, and possibly 105 at Lamar with 100 at Goodland. St. Louis, even out to the east, they're going to be near 100 as well. Marginal risk of severe all throughout northern Wisconsin, southern and central Minnesota, down into South Dakota. Pretty much along this cold front, near this triple point, and near this warm front. And on the west coast, you can see that cold air continuing to build into the Pacific Northwest. Then we go into Monday. We have strong cyclogenesis in northeastern Colorado and a strong response in the low-level wind field. Upslope flow setting in across South Dakota, overrunning over this front. So that's going to be a potent area of isentropic lift, developing frontal wave, and as that advances through the afternoon, we could see surface-based thunderstorms along that warm front, which will be lifting into southwestern Minnesota and eastern South Dakota. Could be severe risks with that. This is also the coldest day in the western states. Lots of cold air filtering back in behind that front. Seattle looking for a high of 63, 64 at Portland, Sacramento only 84, Reno 72. So yeah, definitely modifying as it passes over the warmer terrain. But up to the north, snow in the higher elevations above 5,000 to 6,000 feet. We do have a winter storm watch in the northern Rockies. Western Montana is the main area of concern. Meanwhile, out to the east, that heat wave spreading into the Great Lakes area, Toledo reaching 100 degrees with 99 at St. Louis. And then we've got the tropical surge out there in the western Gulf. That'll be something to watch there. Significantly enhanced probability of precipitation and below normal temperatures. Then we go into Tuesday. That frontal system moves into the high plains, cold air spilling out into the Dakotas, into Wyoming, and snow continuing in the higher elevations. This is going to be the coldest day probably of this month in the Great Basin area and the Northern Rockies, looking for highs in the 50s and 60s in the valleys. Morning lows will be 35 at Elko, 36 at Winnemucca, and Bryce Canyon, looking for a low of 33. Out to the east, that heat wave coming into full force. Again, those 500 millibar heights up to 598 decameters, and out to the west, tropical surge up into the central U.S., the east-west position a little bit uncertain. Then we go into Wednesday. Severe weather possibilities in the central plains, cold weather in the eastern U.S., especially in Montana and the Dakotas. Looking for lows in Bismarck of 46, 45 at Rapid City, and 43 at Billings. Out to the east, heat wave continues. This is probably the peak of the heat wave in the northeastern U.S., looking for highs near 100 across much of that part of the country. And then we'll just go very quickly through the rest of the sequence. Heat wave continuing for the northeast. This front losing definition very slowly, but the boundaries continue sagging south and interacting with that fetch of tropical air. So very high precipitation probabilities in parts of the south-central U.S. Then we go into Friday. That frontal boundary recedes to the north. Precipitation probabilities focus on the central U.S., the GFS going for some sort of tropical system into Florida for that weekend, but there is a lot of uncertainty, and I would not be surprised if it takes that tropical cyclone out of the forecast. So we'll just have to see about that. And as we close out about 2 in the morning Central Time, that MCS continues surging east, kind of a big wall of outflow. And something I wanted to show you, a little bit of interesting tidbit. If we zoom in really close, you can see this spike extending northwest away from the Hastings radar. What is that? Well, if we put the cursor on that spike, if you look down here at the bottom, 316.6 degrees. So that gives us a clue. We go to Google Earth. Well, there's 316.6 degrees. There's the radar site. And we zoom out. Ah, there's a town there. That's the town of Blue Hill. So we look along that radial. There's probably the high school. Doesn't look like anything there. And what's this? It's another water tower. So that is what is causing that spike. It is beam blockage. So we look at Street View. That's looking south. There's a distance sign to Red Cloud. And the water tower, that's it right there, blocking the radar beam to the northwest. A very minor blockage, but we do see it from time to time on that imagery. And I hope you enjoyed this edition of What's Causing That Blockage. Well, it is late, so I need to go ahead and wind down if I have any hope of going to bed before dawn. So let me get this rendered and uploaded. Hope you enjoyed this edition of Forecast Lab. And remember, our Patreon supporters get access to our private Monday shows. So if you want to catch that, head to this link and you can get signed up on Patreon and you will get those weekly shows. All right, so let me go ahead and finish up and we'll close out, and I guess we'll see you soon. Take care and have a great rest of your Friday night and weekend. Bye-bye.